can, but you don't have to.
I think we all feel like we're very familiar with you. So.
That can be good and bad, but I'm delighted to be back in Stafford County. I'm out doing my 105 town hall meetings. If I wasn't on camera, I'd say that I've become a fan of county consolidation after attempting to do 105 town hall meetings. It was easier when there were only 69 as a congressman, and this is, though, valuable to me. And the things I hear and help me prioritize what, there's thousands of things you could be involved in Washington, D.C., and I want to make sure that I'm doing the ones that the folks who hired me to represent them hope to be paying the most attention to those things. I thought I'd say just two topics and then take the conversation whatever direction you'd like for it to go. I wanted you to know that in some ways things haven't changed in what I attempt to do on your behalf. When I asked for the chance to represent you as your congressman and then as your United States Senator, the thing that motivated me to do that was a belief that rural America, the places that we live, is worth fighting for, worth trying to keep around a while longer. And so I focus on a lot of things that most members of Congress don't pay a lot of attention to, and many members of Congress don't appreciate or understand. We are a significant minority. There are very few of us who come from rural America. There's very few, even less, who spend their time worrying about rural America. But our focus hasn't changed from day one, with the goal of increasing the chances that our kids stay in our hometowns, in their hometowns, that they return to their hometowns, that we can attract and keep our senior citizens, that we can bring business to a community, that we can keep Main Street alive and well. The things that makes up for me in my mind is, one, agriculture. We're glad there's wheat being harvested. I assume you'd tell me that moisture and weather has not been a friend. And we are at the moment, this is a perfect time if farmers were here to talk agriculture, because the Farm Bill has just been approved by the Agriculture Committee in the Senate, will be on the floor of the Senate next week. In addition to the Farm Bill, trade matters to us, and there is a lot of things going on. This administration has an agenda related to trade, and while I hope we can get better agreements, the message that I have delivered over and over in Washington, D.C., and really places around the country and in Kansas is, we earn our living in Kansas by what we export. And I know it's difficult dealing with the rest of the world. In fact, I've had people over the time I've represented you tell me, let's just forget the rest of the world and take care of ourselves. In fact, I've had farmers tell me, forget the rest of the world. In a Kansas perspective, that means what 48% of acres of wheat do you not plant and you do not harvest? Because we can produce more than we can consume in the United States, and we earn our living by what we sell around the globe. And the administration, the candidate Trump announced in his campaign that he was opposed to TPP, and we withdrew from that. In my view, that's a problem. We should be engaged in that regard. Then the possibility of withdrawal from NAFTA. Mexico is our #1 purchaser of agriculture commodities in Kansas. Canada is #2. And then tariffs. And unfortunately, when we get into a tariff battle, the place that other countries retaliate is agriculture. And we saw it with grain sorghum. When we announced tariffs against washers and solar panels, Chinese imposed tariffs against grain sorghum. I would expect today, with announcement there's another $50 billion of tariffs being imposed, we will see tariffs placed on soybeans. In my hometown of Plainville, the price of grain sorghum dropped 99 basis points in one day on the announcement of those tariffs. Happens across our state. And so I've been to the White House, I've met with President Trump, and I'm all for trying to figure out how we rein in China. They are a misbehaving country. They steal our trade secrets, they take our technology, they attack us with cyber, but we ought to be focused on trying to keep that from happening as compared to a general battle over tariffs in which we up tariffs, they up tariffs, and not certain where that ends. I've had Kansans, and maybe in this audience you'll want to tell me this, that I need to know the president knows what he's doing. He's a business person, and he's a negotiator, and he's on the right path, Jerry, and that may be true, and I hope it's true. I want to make certain that I've done my part to know it, to have made the point, consistently made the point, that when this trade discussion is over, the end result has to be we're still in the world. If we can get a better agreement, if this is a negotiating tactic, I'm all for it. But the end result has to be we're not walking away. I was in Wichita a month ago, shortly after they announced, it was announced tariffs on aluminum and steel. I helped cut the ribbon on the 10,000 737 fuselage coming out of Spirit Aerosystem, 100% aluminum. What that means is the price of aluminum goes up, and we're competing in a global economy. A couple of things that we were able to suggest to the president in a meeting was that, unfortunately, we are not the only place that the world can buy agricultural commodities. And I wish it was different, I guess. I wish it was different. But Argentina, Brazil, there's others waiting to take the opportunity to sell into our markets and to take our markets. And secondly, that the President and the Secretary of Agriculture have talked about giving farmers a payment if trade goes away. There is no way we'll ever give enough payment to make up for the loss of trade. And the President was genuinely pleased, surprised. Says, I've never met with members of Congress who have constituents who don't want another check. I said, well, that's not our preference. Our preference is to sell around the world. So agriculture, farmers and ranchers front and center, small business issues, trying to keep Main Street alive. I am so pleased. I came by the grocery store. For as long as I've been in Congress, I've told people that where I come from, economic development can be whether or not there's a grocery store in town. And almost no one in Washington, D.C. understands why that would be an issue. Of course there's a grocery store. The point that I'm attempt to make is not that I'm interested in a law that says we are required to have a grocery store every number of square miles or every number of people. It's that we need to do things that keep the cost of being in business as low as possible so that small businesses in small towns that aren't growing leaps and bounds have a chance to succeed. When I was your congressman, not your senator, I think this is true. Over that period of time, I probably did not represent communities that had growing population in the long term. I don't think it's my fault, but we worked to try to reverse that trend. But when you don't have more people, how many more hammers can the hardware store sell when the cost of being in business goes up and there's not more people in the community? So this is about trying to keep the cost of being in business down, and there's lots of factors that go into that. Healthcare, trying to keep hospital doors open, physicians in community, pharmacy on Main Street. We will lose our communities in the absence of access to health care. And health care has been a significant issue for a long time. And part of it is this access issue, part of it is the affordability. My view has been, this is on the access side, is trying to keep certain that Medicare rates, and particularly critical access hospitals, receive a reimbursement that cover their costs. It's like schools. Small schools need more money per student because they don't have enough students to cover the fixed costs, just like we talked about business. Same way with our hospitals, and so we get reimbursed at a higher rate based presumably upon costs as compared to the amount for a particular procedure. And then technology. I stopped in Holyrood on my way here, extra half hour in my time, and didn't know what to do except to walk Main Street of Holyrood. And H&B telecommunications company. These are things that matter to us, and they matter. I guess I could jump this back to agriculture. More and more, it is access to technology, and in this case, particularly broadband, that allows our farmers to be more efficient and more cost-effective and more environmentally sound. So we have a close working relationship with the FCC and with the Rural Utilities Service in the Department of Agriculture. But we're trying to make certain our schools, our hospitals, our libraries, people, our businesses have access to technology. And the good news is that I used to always see the internet as the opponent to rural America, to Main Street. And the reality is, while there's still some challenges that come from the internet and competition, it is our opportunity to sell around the world. I was in Barnes. It's one of my favorite towns until the cafe and bakery called Our Daily Bread closed. I always went through Barnes to stop to get a coconut cream pie. There's a general store there, and my guess is if there's something you want, it's in that store if they can find it. And I said, how do you stay in business in a town of 300 people? Well, the internet. We sell what we have here to people who don't live here. I remember, this will sound political, I remember when we had a governor who was opposed to the coal-fired plant at Holcomb. And her argument was, why would we build a coal-fired plant when the electricity is going to benefit the people who live out of state? Because most of that electricity was going to be sold to Colorado. Well, Governor, that's what we do. And the idea of bringing more money to St. John or to Stafford from someplace else, build something here and sell it elsewhere, that's how we create wealth in our own communities. Finally, and not just because the superintendent is here, education. I'm of the view that education decisions should be mostly local, state and local, and we work to get rid of the mandates that drive up the cost of being in business for our schools, to raise the price of the cost of education without the commensurate benefit in the quality of education. On the other hand, for those mandates that make sense and are not going away, like IDEA, special education, we work to make sure the federal government does a better job of keeping its commitment, which it's performed poorly on to date. Example of trying to get rid of things, No Child Left Behind was something I never supported, voted against. I want curriculum and assessments to be decided here. Rob, my wife, for most of the time we lived in Hayes, played the piano. She was the accompanist at Hayes High School. She would tell me No Child Left Behind diminished the focus on art and music, and she thought that was a bad thing, and she's my wife, and I agree with her. I've always worried about vocational and technical education. We cannot afford, in the places we come from, for us to only focus on certain subjects to the detriment of others. And our career education, this is the most likely way that we keep and bring back young families to our communities, is those who have a career path, a career education. And we've got to get rid of this idea for our students to be a success that they have to go away to school or they've got to be something that we don't have in our town. And so we'll work to try to make certain that we pay for the things we require of your school district so that they don't have to pass the costs on to the property taxpayers. And we'll try to get rid of the things that don't really make a lot of sense and really aren't our business. That's number one. Number two is this. I'm not a veteran. I graduated from high school in 1972. Vietnam War coming to an end. As a 16, 17-year-old kid, the Vietnam War influenced the way I looked at the world. One of the things I saw is when our servicemen and women returned from Vietnam, they were poorly treated, disrespectfully or ignored. Ignored at best, disrespectfully too often. And I always thought, I'm going to do whatever I can, never expecting to be a United States Senator, but I'll do what I can as a citizen to make sure that we honor those who served. Since I've been elected to Congress, I've been a member of the Veterans Committee, and for the last 2 years, in addition, chaired the committee that funds the Department of Veterans Affairs. When I was your congressman, I represented a congressional district larger than the state of Illinois. There is no VA hospital here. So we worked to get the VA to open up outpatient clinics so that veterans could access care closer to home, particularly routine care. In your case, there's an outpatient clinic in Hutchinson, but we were successful in Salina, in Hayes. There's one in Liberal, Dodge City. We tried to get one in Goodland. It ended up in Burlington, Colorado. But my point was always, if you're a 93-year-old World War II veteran in Atwood, Kansas, how do you get to Wichita or Denver? So we opened up the outpatient clinics, but I could say the same thing if you're a 93-year-old World War II veteran in Atwood, how do you get to Hayes or Burlington, Colorado? And so the goal has been to bring the services where veterans actually live. And we have, the House and Senate have passed, the President signed a week ago, something called the Mission Act. It replaces what we've traditionally called choice. We created choice about 4 years ago. It hasn't worked very well because, in my view, the VA didn't want it to work very well. They wanted to keep veterans within the big hospital, red brick buildings in big cities. And unions in particular were interested in making certain that the employment stayed within those buildings. And the VA has lots of problems when it comes to leadership in Washington, D.C. Many veterans, including people in Stafford County, will tell me how wonderful the VA has been to them and what great quality of service they received in Wichita or Topeka or Leavenworth. That is wonderful, and I hope it happens all the time. But there are still too many veterans who slip through the cracks. And so what we created with choice is that if you live more than 40 miles from a VA facility, or if it takes the VA more than 30 days to provide the service, then you at your choice could have it done someplace else, especially at home. The VA implemented that in a very difficult way, and many veterans who tried to get enrolled struggled with it. Our providers didn't get paid. It just was kind of one thing after. My hometown example is Larry, who's a Vietnam veteran from, he's actually from Natoma, but I always see him in Plainville, called to tell me, Jerry, I used to tell people he told me he wanted a colonoscopy, and people told me that can't be true. So he must have said he needed a colonoscopy. And he called to tell me that I called the Wichita VA. I talked to the folks down there, and I said, I'd like to have my colonoscopy done here at home. And the VA folks said, sir, I'm sorry, you don't qualify for that because of where you live. It's within 40 miles of Hayes. Oh, no, Larry says to the VA. I've already called the VA clinic in Hayes. They don't do colonoscopies. Sir, that doesn't matter. There's still a facility within 40 miles. That's the kind of stuff that we've had with this program. There's a number of changes, including your critical access hospitals now get reimbursed at critical access hospital rates instead of just general Medicare. But here's the major change, which is the key is no longer, the qualifications are no longer 40 miles, 30 days. It is what is in the best interest of the veteran. And that, I hope, if we stay on the VA, can be implemented in a way that makes it much simpler for people who decide they want to do something at home. And it is useful to Stafford County, it's useful to rural America to have our veterans use this program. It helps strengthen our healthcare delivery system because as our schools need students, our hospitals need patients, our pharmacy needs customers, our physicians need patients as well. And so the more dollars we spend at home, it strengthens the healthcare delivery system for all of us. The point of all this is there is a program that is being implemented now. It will take a bit of time to get up and running. But if there is a way that I or my staff can be of help to you or any veteran you know, please let us know, put us to work. The VA testified after we passed choice that the veterans don't like this program and don't want this program. I don't want the Department of Veterans Affairs to turn out to be right. And my view is that lacks total common sense. And if they don't want it, it's because they've tried it and it's been such a mess to get the access. My dad is no longer living, but my dad lived until 98, a World War II veteran, never used the VA. My mom and dad going from Plainville to Wichita would have been a major undertaking. The traffic once they got to Wichita would have been disturbing to them, and the blue and yellow lines that you follow around in the VA hospital to find the office that you're supposed to go to, they would have given up. My dad never used the VA healthcare system, but if he could have seen his hometown doctor, he might have done that, although my dad always said, I'm not going to a doctor, they'll find something wrong with me. So, if we can help, that's what we're here for, and I'd be glad to take the conversation. I usually try to leave 2 or 3 minutes for questions, and I've left more than that. What can we talk about? Yes, ma'am.
The Farm Bill, the Senate passed, and it's going to, I guess, the committee, right? And
Committee.
now it's going to go to the full Senate. And I noticed that they have a hemp, industrial hemp portion to it. Can you tell me anything about that? The reason I ask is that the Kansas legislature passed a hemp bill. But it's to do research. It's not to say, okay, right now we're going to jump into it. So I just wonder what the federal counterpart might.
The provision, I think the basic core of the provision in the Farm Bill is it would make it legal for hemp to be grown and make that possible across states. The argument has been hemp is not marijuana. The argument is there is opportunities for hemp to be used in industrial processes and it provides one more crop that can be grown in places that are struggling. I'm a supporter of that provision, and my expectation is that it will stay in the Farm Bill, certainly through the Senate. I wouldn't be surprised, but through the House, and be sent to the President. So once we get a Farm Bill done, I think it will eliminate the federal restriction on the growing of hemp. I've not heard from law enforcement on this issue. Again, I think these things are totally different, but somehow over time they've gotten lumped together. And if we're going to survive in agriculture diversity, if there's a market for hemp, this doesn't change my views about growing marijuana, or I don't want Kansas to become Colorado in the recreational sense, but this seems okay to me. Interesting, this question comes up every once in a while. There is an interest.
There is, and I'm on the Ag Committee in Topeka, and there's a lot of people that want it, yeah. So.
I had calls about, I don't know what the word is, but like people who had Parkinson's who were looking for the oil. CBD oil. American Legion, incidentally, talking about veterans and talking about this topic, American Legion endorses the use of medical marijuana within the VA system. The attitude is changing, at least on the medical side. Maybe elsewhere. Yes, sir. You look like you had something to say.
Is the Farm Bill going to be, going to pass it quite a bit like what it's been in the past?
The Senate committee has approved a farm bill that is generally considered status quo. It's very similar to what we have today. The House has been unable, the House committee passed a farm bill, but the House floor has been unable to pass a farm bill. Theirs has greater differences, although most of their arguments is about food stamps, what's now called SNAP, so the nutrition programs. 80% of the farm bill is nutrition programs, 20% of the farm bill is farm programs. It's still called a farm bill, but most of the money is spent elsewhere. And that's become a political point, a divisive point in the House in particular. In the Senate, we can only pass a farm bill if we get 60 votes, and so we have a different approach. We want to get a farm bill done, and the ARC, for example, one of the things that we've been working on is to try to change the safety net programs, ARC in particular, and the ability for farmers only to choose which program they go into once during the life of the farm bill. Those things, I'm not on the Ag Committee, I'm on the Ag Appropriations Committee. Two senators from one state from the same party can't serve on the same committee, so Senator Roberts is the chairman of the Ag Committee. But one of the things we've been working to change is a more frequent election, the disparity between what a farmer gets who farms, particularly from one county to the next, in that safety net, and the timeliness. Today, if you need help from the farm programs because of low commodity prices, and it takes a year before the financial help comes, which is often pretty darn late for farmers who, many of them, still hang on by a thread. But I would describe the bill that will be on the Senate floor as pretty much like what has been there before. And the issues will be debated on the floor. There will be amendments offered. One of the places that's always attacked is crop insurance. So I'll have a number of my colleagues who think we should get out of the crop insurance business, or we ought to limit it. We ought to provide it only to the smallest farmers or the lowest income farmers. We will have to fight off a number of amendments as there'll be attempts to make it significantly different than it is today.
Last time you were here in front of us, I asked you a question.
I remember you.
I asked you a question about your stance on hearings for President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, and you said that you felt they should be held. Mm-hmm. A week later in Washington, D.C., you completely changed that statement. Why?
I wouldn't describe it the way that you described it. What I said is that I was satisfied I didn't need a hearing for me to decide, but what I attempted to tell you and what I still believe and what I believed then, you're smiling at me, is that the process ought to work.
That's not what you said in Washington, though. Your statement in Washington was the exact opposite of what you said here in this room.
Well, I hope not, and I don't think so. But okay, I'll take your view.
I was very riled when you made your statement in Washington. That's why I remembered it so well.
Okay. I wish that the Senate would have heard and didn't intend to express any different point of view than we should do this. The point when I was asked was, do you need a hearing for you to know how you'll vote? My answer to that was no.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
We'll disagree.
Right.
All right. Thank you for being pleasant in your disagreement.
I have another question that's completely different from that. Is in what universe is what's going on at the border with the separation of children from their parents morally acceptable?
It is not morally acceptable.
Then why are we doing it?
Because Congress is, at the moment, incapable of passing legislation to overturn decisions made at the administration, by the administration. Although the House of Representatives is taking up an immigration bill next week, at least I heard on the radio this morning, it includes provisions to limit or restrict the separation of parents, families at the border. I don't have any, there's no way that I can explain how you can justify that. What the explanation is from the Department of Justice is that it reduces the disincentive, I said that wrong, it reduces the desire of parents to come to the border and cross the border if they know they're going to lose their children. I suppose that's a deterrent to illegal activity, but I still don't know how you justify it on a moral basis.
His statement last week was that if they don't want to be separated from their children, don't bring them. I'm going, excuse me?
I hope that if the House would pass something in regard to immigration, I think there's a will in the Senate to pursue it as well. I had hoped that we would resolve DACA. We didn't. Nothing passed the Senate. And I still think that's, and there's an excuse that we now have the courts intruded and said that President Trump can't change the DACA program. That decision doesn't really make sense to me, but at the moment it's on hold. And so Congress used that as an excuse not to deal with a difficult issue. And we ought to deal with immigration. My view is we have a broken immigration system. We need better security at our borders. We need to know who's coming. I don't really see that as an economic issue. I see that as a law enforcement, a crime, terrorist, our national security point of view. And by border, I should say borders. And we ought to figure out that we ought not focus attention on DACA. I think that's that ought not be our priority. We ought to be trying to get rid of people who are causing us harm, not people who were brought here by their parents. But my point is, I hope that when we get back to DACA, that we can deal with other immigration issues as well. That there are those in the Senate, those in Congress who have insisted that we have a comprehensive immigration plan. And there are issues in immigration that there's significant division in the country and in Congress. My view is let's deal with the issues that we can agree on and try to resolve them. We can work on the harder ones later, but in the meantime, do something. And in my view, we could have a DACA fix, certainty for people who are here wondering what's going to happen when they don't really have a place to return to. And we can do something about agricultural labor, and we can do something about high tech. I think there's a list of things in which you could get 60 votes in the Senate to do something. There may not be 60 votes to do everything. That now would include this new development related to separating children. And I don't watch the news because it's so messy, but especially it's very troubling to watch the news now with the story of the kids and families, the parents. Sometimes I'll give you the chance to disagree with me. Sometimes Kansans will tell me that we ought not really allow immigration. If companies in the United States paid more money, Americans would do those jobs. And I don't know, you can ask your feed yard operators here in this county if they think that if they paid more money, that there would be our kids and grandkids who would take these jobs? I think the answer is probably not. We don't raise our kids to do that. And we don't, with the exception of the two young men that are here in the room, not all of our kids have the work ethic that your two have the work ethic of, I don't know that I have my parents' work ethic. I hope my kids have my work ethic. We try to make life easier for everybody.
Is our government going to change any to speak of with the new President Trump?
I would think you'd tell me that it's changed already. You don't see it?
Well, there's a lot of controversy, it seems like.
Oh, in that change?
Which ways?
I actually had the thought that with a new president, I mean, here's the way I would, when President Obama was president, about half the people in Kansas who called our office would say, you tell Moran not to budge 1 inch on anything. Don't let him give in. The other half would call. There's people in the room who I'm sure fit these categories. The other half would call and say, why can't Jerry work with others and get something done? So there's this clash. And I thought, well, with a new president, maybe we can start fresh. Now it's just a different set of people. I mean, it used to be people would tell me at a town hall meeting, why haven't you impeached President Obama? Now you'll, not necessarily in Stafford County, but in other counties you'll go have a town hall meeting and why haven't you impeached President Trump? And it's like, we can't seem to have an election and then use the next 4 years to work together, and if we don't like the candidate that won, then we have a chance 4 years from now to replace them. We want to have the fight year in and year out. I would tell you that I think the Senate in particular, but maybe Congress, the Senate is more cooperative than what you see on television, or what you hear in the news, because the way to get on the news is to have a fight. To say ridiculous things, that's what gets reported. Most politicians want to be in the news, and so have a fight. But really, while we struggle with the big issues, the day-to-day kind of governing, there's a real desire on all issues to try to find common ground. And I would tell you that this matters. Again, when people tell me don't budge 1 inch or work together with others and get something done, the way I look at that is there's a long line, a spectrum of issues. A narrow set of issues, there's not much room to budge. Integrity, morals, constitution, promises, and then the vast things that we deal with, we really have no choice but to find common ground. And it's particularly true for those of us, going back to rural, we are a minority. Whether the Republicans are in the majority or the Democrats are in the majority in the Congress, we are a minority. And if we don't find people to work with, our victories will be none. So again, people can tell me and my colleagues, don't you give in, and there's a few things in which you shouldn't give in, but on the vast majority of things, we've got to find people who want to work together, or there's just no ability to solve problems. The change in the time that I've been an elected official, I think, is when I started, most of the focus was on how can I help instead of who do I fight. But again, I also think that Congress reflects citizens. I mean, there's a division in the country. Not watching the news, I watch it enough to know that if I'm watching Fox, I see something different than when I watch MSNBC. And everybody picks their brand of news, and then none of us know, we just know what we know. And I grew up watching the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, and at the end of his program he said, now that's just the way it is. I believed him. When he retired, I discovered he was pretty liberal in his views, but I never knew that as a viewer of the newscast. The news was delivered, I think, without the slant that we have today, and I think it pulls us apart. The internet, people, even in disagreement, I've never had a bad experience with people. Kansans are respectful people. Social media is a totally different thing. You say, and I have a new explanation for, I don't look at my Facebook comments, but I have a new explanation for what I think they sometimes say. It's the Russians. They're doing this to divide us. Yes, sir? No? Nope. I should quit walking around for the benefit of the camera? Sorry. Carolyn?
You made mention of the grocery store, and I know how helpful your office was in that, but I don't know if everyone in this room knows that you were very helpful in us competing for a grant that was, as one of our board members called it, the game changer, that really kind of led to a path where we could really make this happen. And it's, I think, going to be a really significant thing that kind of has some ripple effects in other areas of economic development here. Thank you very much for that, and if you're interested, we'd be glad to kind of show you.
If I can come back on the day that you cut the ribbon or that the shelves are stocked, that'd be great. I often stop in grocery stores to get my lunch. No offense to the pizza place, and but I always this sense that we have this obligation to shop to keep our grocery store viable is with me. I tell people I grew up in a town that had 4 grocery stores and 1 bank. We now have 1 grocery store and 4 banks. We're not any wealthier. I don't know how we have all these financial institutions. On this topic, kind of what you were saying about getting along, there are some examples. And one of them is this issue of the regulation of community banks, what I call relationship banks. We were successful. I'm a member of the banking committee, and 2.5 years ago, the banking committee passed legislation out of our committee to repeal a lot of the things in Dodd-Frank that came about after the 2008 financial collapse as they related to our smallest banks. It came out on a straight party line vote. Every Republican voted yes, every Democrat voted no, and that means that there would not be 60 votes for that bill on the floor. So we went to work and we found 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans who sat down for a year and a half and tried to find a compromise. Lop something off over here, lop something off over here. Can we find something that would be satisfactory? That finally took place, and both the House and Senate, the President signed legislation that changes the regulations on our community and our smaller regional banks. And that matters to us too in Stafford and St. John and Maxville. The Farm Bill provides a safety net. We sometimes forget that the relationship we have between our lenders and our borrowers is a safety net as well. I've been making this case to the regulators, the FDIC, the Office of Comptroller of Currency, the Federal Reserve. If you make lending just a computer program, and you punch in the numbers and you either get a yes or no, and that's what the regulators would require, then the character and history that our banks have with their customers is out. And who's going to help finance a grocery store, but who's going to finance agriculture? In bad times, the decision will be made, we can't afford to do this because our regulators say this isn't a good loan, but we've dealt with your family for several generations. We know you, we know you'll pay. I've seen this in bad times and just the commodity price, but it was highlighted to me in Clark County, and Ashland is the county seat, the place that had the fires. Those cattlemen lost all of their collateral. Their cattle died. What do you do if you're a cattleman and you got no collateral? The bank said, we're going to continue lending regardless of the collateral. And again, if the regulators don't allow them to do that, or the regulators change the regulations and they can't do that, and you take character and relationships out, the safety net of being able to have a line of credit disappears, and rural America is harmed once again. A couple of points here. This took 3 years to get enough people together, Republicans and Democrats, to find something we could agree on. And when we did, it passed. And that's a piece of good news. It also means that our ability to have hometown banks still make loans on things that are good for the community continues to exist. I wondered from your compliment or thank you, I'm happy that we were able to be of help. You should know, Carolyn, that my new chairmanship in the Appropriations Committee is, among other things, the Department of Commerce, which means EDA grants. And I had the leadership of the economic development folks at EDA in my office this week in a getting acquainted session. Sterling is an example of a community that just got an economic development grant for their water tower and sewers. And so we're trying to develop the relationship in which we can encourage good behavior.
One of our another initiative that we're putting some effort into is to try to leverage the power of broadband to be able to have more opportunities for remote work locally. So to be able to connect people to job opportunities with companies that aren't necessarily physically located here. We actually have been in communication with your office, which was very helpful on a possibility that I don't think is going to end up being the right one for us right now. But if there is an EDA opportunity, we may be in contact again or something.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised, but I hear from you. And we're glad to help.
Yeah, I think, kind of what I see is the thing that will help keep the grocery store successful, the schools, the hospital, any number of things, is if we can find better ways to create jobs here, and it's the population. It's the population that is at its root, I think, the struggle with keeping a lot of these things healthy and viable, and so we're trying.
One of the most likely things of having people return to our communities is if there's a solid, financially viable agricultural economy, and whether it rains or not determines lots of things about our future. Superintendent, oh, go ahead, Karen.
There's an issue that I'm sure you've been aware of that it continues to be a concern to me, is how we're handling the water rights with Quivira here. And I know that at its level, right now, it's a state water right issue. They've asserted that their senior water rights have been infringed by the usage of irrigation here. And
right.
So, but there's a part of me that also looks at the big picture and says, if we didn't have the federal government here, which doesn't have the same oversight on how it manages the water it has, and and this isn't a water conservation issue. I think a lot of people think of this as being a water conservation issue, and we're not conserving water in this scenario. We're just taking it from irrigators and pushing it down the creek through Quivira, and it's just flowing away. This has the potential. I've kind of done the back of the envelope math. The grain production in Stafford County is 120 million. We've reduced grain production 10%. What kind of entrepreneurial business are we going to bring into Stafford County that's going to create $10 million worth of revenue in a year? So I see this as a threat, and one that we wouldn't have if we didn't have the federal government as a landowner in our backyard.
We are aware of this issue. My ag staff and water staff have been at 2 or 3 meetings. We've had conversations with Water Pack. It is a state issue at the moment related to water rights, priorities. But I have no doubt but what this, because of Quivira, ends up with more Moran involvement, more federal involvement than it is at the moment.
If they chose to manage things differently, we wouldn't have the water issue, I think, that we have at the local level. And that's more of a political issue, which, yes, we can, I guess that's where it is. It's a political issue at some level, too, is how I see it anyway.
No, you're right. At the moment, it's a legal issue, but it will become a political issue depending upon the outcome of the legal battle. I think that's what happens. Superintendent?
It's just a legal issue between 2 individual parties. It's a legal issue between individual parties and federal government. That's what makes it.
Is Quivira in your school district? Land?
Very little.
It's in Stafford County.
Most of it.
Stafford.
Is there I should know this, is there a payment in lieu of taxes?
No.
So unlike Fort Riley or Fort Leavenworth, where the federal government chips in because those entities are not paying taxes, that doesn't happen at a
No.
wildlife, that's, lost the word.
Wildlife of international importance.
So it's not, right, it's
Okay.
not contributing, but it's also, right, that it's not getting a pilot or whatever.
Kansas has is one of the states with the fewest amount of federal land. We have very little federal land in our state. And you've got states to the west of us in which it's huge percentages. And yeah, I hate to admit this on tape, but I hadn't thought about that issue for Quivira. Where I see this is the national grasslands down by Elkhart. Huge number of acres, huge percentage of the county, all federal grasslands. And You've given me something else to think about. I want to hear about your school. I've had the fear that our schools were not focused on career and technical education. I visited 40 schools last year. I was wrong. There's a significant change over the last 4 or 5 years of focus on career path, and I saw really good things in that regard.
Right.
So I was pleased.
Yeah.
Student enrollment?
We're steady.
I guess it's not.
Yeah.
We'll know in
steady
September?
In the county, down, pretty steady overall,
Yeah.
around the county. Yeah. The same things you're talking about with our, just the focus is more on what's right for the kid, fitting our school to the kids rather than, hey, this is what we have. And, it's all about test scores.
There were a number of schools who dropped in Kansas that dropped band, for example, during the focus on other things, and we lost FFA programs in schools across Kansas. You wouldn't think that.
Yeah,
I'm happy to talk education with you too.
Let me ask you about.
I left the state legislature because I got tired of education and property tax issues. I arrived in the state senate after the reappraisal and classification amendment in our Constitution, and just my whole time in Topeka was related to school finance, and
It still is.
it still is.
Yeah, most of our education issues are more Senator Taylor's responsibility than yours, of course. But school choice, was framed as from the top, from Secretary DeVos. It seems like it's all about public education is not good enough, and the way to improve that is take our public dollars and give them to private schools. School choice, we frame it as if we can get our kids into private schools, then that's better for them, but it becomes not parents choosing schools, it's about schools choosing the kids, because our neediest kids probably don't get into those private schools. And also rural America, we have 0 private schools in our county. So that school choice argument is lost on kids and families in our county. I know you don't make those decisions, but
I actually do make those decisions.
well, as far as from the top,
Secretary DeVos can say
about-
what she wants to say about this
Right.
topic, and she and I have had conversations about it. But I would tell you that I'm not a supporter of vouchers or the way you do. I'd hate to say I'm not in favor of people being able to choose, but I'm not in favor of a government program, particularly a federal government program. If states or local communities want to make different decisions about what they do in their education, but my view in part of what you said is most of the school districts I represent need more students themselves. And you bring a private school to the forefront and you lose 5 or 6, 7, 8 kids from the public school, there is no, instead of saying choice, I would say there is no competition. There's no opportunity for our schools to survive. So the rural nature and the low enrollment that we have in Kansas tells me that this is not the right thing to do. And again, based upon my view that education decisions should be made at home, not in Washington, D.C., I voted in the way that you seemingly would want me to. And I had this conversation with Secretary DeVos, which is, one, and the reason I say I do have something to do with this is, you can't create choice. They're trying to create some pilot programs, but you can't create this program without congressional approval. So the law would have to be changed. There's not the votes to do that now, and I don't see it in the future. So, I mean, my point to the Secretary DeVos is, you talk about being for local control, do not impose vouchers, choice on local school districts. And I told her about school districts in Kansas, yours. The first place I ever gave a graduation speech after being elected to Congress was at Pawnee Heights, which is Roselle and Burdett. And they had 11 kids in their class. Madam Secretary, our schools are so important to our community. They are supported by the people who live there. Even if you no longer have kids in school, our communities are, this is our lifeblood. And we would not be able to survive with fewer students in our public schools, we struggle to keep them available today. So don't force this upon us. And then let me tell you about Blue Valley and Olathe and Shawnee Mission. They are capable of, they love their schools too in a different way, and they're able to put money into it, and this is not the solution to the problems there. Don't force Blue Valley to make a decision. Don't force St. John to make a decision. I didn't say that well. Don't you force them to lose the ability to make a decision. Let them decide how they want to manage their schools. And she committed to me that that would be the case, that she would not force anybody. And again, I don't think she has the authority to do it.
But everybody, you and she are aware that the federal funding to public schools has diminished.
We are in this sense. Actually, I'm an appropriator, as I said. Title I. Title I monies have gone up, but because Kansas didn't fund the formula, the problem is because of the gap in the years in which Kansas didn't fund their schools, then the formula punishes Kansas Title I money. So we have increased Title I money, I think, every year that I've been there. Not enough, it's like we've increased special education funding, but there's always more kids and more expense, so you don't always feel it, but it's not that, I had a superintendent, Southwest Kansas, who was telling me this, and it just made no sense to me because I vote for increased funding for Title I every year. I've seen the results, and he's telling me we're funding Title I less. It's the formula that they use. They haven't changed the formula. It's just that Kansas gets punished for in case of the formula, I try to stay out of this in a fight, but underfunding public schools. There's a lost cost. There's a cost that sometimes doesn't get seen in decisions that are made in the past.
Senator, one other thing, another hot topic, I guess, for schools is that school safety.
What would you like? What would you request?
I'm not requesting anything.
All right.
What do you see as the role of the federal government in that?
Congress passed the Safe Schools Act in the FY18 appropriation bill. Our committee just funded $100 million in school safety grants. So, the response, the issue of guns is a difficult one, and while nothing is resolved in regard to that issue, the steps are being taken. And my superintendent in Johnson was there at the town hall meeting to tell me, I certainly appreciate what you say about local control. And then later in the meeting, but if you could get us some money for school safety, we'd appreciate it. I understand the kind of the dichotomy there, and we're doing that. And I don't know whether schools are different in St. John or not. One of the more recent schools I visited was Salina Central. The access to Council Grove is another example. Cottonwood Falls, the access to their schools is now much narrower. The glass windows and the buzz-in. Again, that doesn't solve all the problems, but there is money that's being made available to schools across the country for purposes of greater school safety. The COPS program and the school safety officer, similar circumstances. But it is, I wish there was the simple solution.
Isn't it mostly the kids that are doing the school shootings?
That
go to that school?
You either see I think historically you've seen a student or somebody who was a student returning to their school.
Yeah, so it's hard to police your own.
You're right.
When you're looking for somebody else.
Well, and I hate to suggest that there's other opportunities, but if you secured schools, then what's the next building? The things that I want to change in this country require morals, integrity, values, parents. It involves schools because we have too many kids who don't have that opportunity for that at home, but churches, next door neighbors. The things that you want to change, I can't pass a law and find the change, it takes people changing. I gave the graduation address this year at Manhattan Christian College, and I won't attempt to do that in this town hall meeting, but we too often look for politics to change who we are as a country or a people, and the change comes from a different place, in my view, than one more law. And that's something I can't force, but it's something that we can change our lives, and churches and communities and organizations could get involved in other people's lives trying to. It starts at home. I'm going to head to Hayes. Sir, you came in late. Did you miss the opportunity to?
I had the Times myself.
Oh.
But there's one thing I would like to say is I went to Concordia to visit a friend of mine who got killed in Vietnam, and he did not die as a Republican or a Democrat. He died as an American.
Thank you for the reminder. I don't know that I can add to that, but I would try, because when I get discouraged in Washington, D.C., and there's lots of moments in which it's like, I'll put on my running shoes and I'll walk up to the Lincoln Memorial. And on that walk, I'll go by now the World War II Memorial, and then the Vietnam Wall, and then back by the Korean War Memorial. And one of the reminders that I always have is these people who sacrificed, they didn't sacrifice because they were Republicans or Democrats. They believed that they could make their country safer, better for their families, for the world. And those are the role models that we need to, as members of Congress, Americans need to come together and follow their example. It makes just this partisan bickering that goes on so irrelevant if you put it in perspective of the sacrifice that those people made. So thank you for telling me. Thank you.